everybody to our Tuesday talk for today. We are very honored to have Star Montana. So just a couple words about Star before we start. I'm sure all of you know tons about her, but she is a photo-based artist who lives and works in Los Angeles, California. She was born and raised in Boyle Heights, in the neighborhood of East LA, where people and space serve as a subject and backdrop for her work. Some of her work was recently exhibited at the Charlie James Gallery, the Residency Art Gallery, La Plaza de Cultura y Artes, Occidental College, the Mexican Center for Culture and Cinematic Arts at the Mexican Consulate General in Mexico, and many more. She was the artist in residence at the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation in 2020. She holds a Master's of Fine Arts in Art from the University of Southern California, a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Photography from the School of Visual Arts, and an Associate Arts in Photography from East LA College. So it's my great honor to welcome Star.
Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate that. I'm always really honored when people come to my talks, and just listen to my story and what's going on in the conversation between my work, because a big part of the imagery is an act of resistance and not allowing us to be erased, because the work is about I always say it's about like kind of Trojan horse, and the idea that these images are Trojan horses and that they're beautiful and alluring, so that you look at them and you're like, these are beautiful visually, but then when you're captivated by them, they're acts of resistance against systematic erasure, So you automatically, coming to this talk or even acknowledging this human, you are engaging of an act of resistance that does not let you erase this person. And so that is very important for my work. And why that happens, right? So this is a male of my family. And I don't know, my talks are always different, depending on my moods and how I'm feeling. And so this is my brother. His name is Frankie, or Frank, and he is one of the last remaining males in my matriarchal family. So in my matriarchal family, I would say about 80 to 90% of our family has sort of been genocidal killed through the military army complex, through gang violence, through the, drug, the war on drugs. So all these systems kind of all interplay. And so almost all the males are all gone in my family. I always thought of myself being raised in a matriarchal society. But I've also witnessed almost all the males die. And so my brother, who was a male, him being born a male automatically was terrifying, because then that means, when is he gonna die? And he's 30 or he's 31 now. And that's actually a very old age in my family, and I grew up punk rock, and my brother, this idea, seeing the imagery of the misfits, he grew up punk rock too. So rejecting gang culture or hip hop culture was already an act of resistance of denying that you will be killed. Although right now he shaves his head because he's going a little bald, but then so there's this idea, if you have a shaven head, that might look a certain way in a certain area, where we grew up, so he always had long hair, but now he's shaving it because of the balding. But like, there's these symbols, right? So this is like a symbol of like, do not harm me. I am not a part of your culture, And I remember I bought him this, and I bought him this at like a flea market, And so it's not the real merchandise, and so it's faded, and he cut it and everything like that. And we made this image together in a house we used to live at. And it was an old family property on his side. We don't have the same father, but I call my brother's dad. So it's on my brother's dad's side of a property we were living at. And, it's like those old houses where everything's kind of falling apart, but they don't replace anything because of the memories, or like so-and-so bought it. So these curtains or these blinds were kind of ripping. And so at a certain time in winter, the sun would come through, and so it would illuminate everything into the darkness, from the darkness into light. And I saw my brother being illuminated and kind of like showing him like as a chosen person. And so he saw that I was looking at something and focusing on him. And so he knew I wanted to create this image. So first I created it digitally to see if we were able to actually create this. And then I was like, oh, just wait there. And I tend to not like to make too many dark images. My images are usually very light or like illuminating things. And so this is a very special image for me, to actually it be almost all totally dark and to illuminate the human, which is like my brother. But I think it's very significant because, again, like there's so much darkness in our family, and him coming to the forefront talks a lot about how I'm feeling, like how much I love this human and how much he's coming out of all this darkness in our family, And so it's very, for me, with my imagery, there's a lot of symbolism. There's a lot of like, I don't like to like put like, this is 100% what this image is about. Like, I also like the viewer to like, if you tell me this is what the image is about, I'm like, oh, okay, cool. I didn't even think about that, So I love when people read, different messages into the imagery, But this image definitely, I make large bodies of work, and it takes years. Like, I would say I started this body of work in 2013. And I showed it in 2019, and I'm doing part 2. So let's say that it's taking 10 years to even, begin to scratch the surface. And so even though people say like, photography is quick, for me it is very slow because I start to unearth things. I start to see the connections in years. And for me, photography is so important in terms of like, letting things progress and also letting things rot. And I mean in terms of the body and decay, and in terms of like houses and places and evolve. So my brother is a different person, but also when I go and I photograph a place and then I go in 3 years to investigate it, I love to see what has happened. So I really love photography in that way, in the investigation of what is going on. And also, it is a remembrance, I'm very glad that this is not a remembrance of my brother, This is just a moment in time. I don't want to do any more remembrances, because I've had to do that so many times. But we actually, in our next image, we will be talking about remembrance and all that. So I wanted to kind of zero in on one person, and then we will kind of talk about all that stuff in the next image. So we can go over there. So this image is called Paula's desk. And if you haven't seen it, feel free to look really quick. So I made this image in 2014. And this was really, really important for me to make. This is my grandmother's desk. My grandmother was still alive at the time. Since then, she's passed away, and she passed away really sad. So, and again, this is why, for me, it's very hard to make this work because the sadness keeps coming, you know? And I have a therapist. I always say, like, my work is not my therapy. My therapy is my therapy, you know? You know, because I tell my students, you shouldn't destroy yourself making your work, you know? And so I put boundaries on that, you know? Like, I will do this work, and then if it's too much, then I stop, and then I do a different. I work on like 2 or 3 series at a time. So, you know, I kind of like, this is very intensive work, so I take long breaks as well. And so for me, this was a very important image because this was something that I constantly was visually seeing growing up. And I love to do installations where I gather images like the image you saw, archival images that say like I will pull from here and from different places. And I put them all together to kind of connect the dots in the migration patterns of my family, of people passing away, of connections, of just different things happening in my family. And so with this image, it's kind of like when you're seeing everything all together in an installation, what this image is kind of alluring to is that, say, even like you're going to find all the archival images, you're going to find everything within this image, that this is like the mother image. This is like, you know, like, you know, whenever you make something and you can, what is it? Even like from the sourdough, like the mother, you know, that this is the mother, you know? And you're going to pull everything from this. And so growing up, my grandmother, she would always try to attempt to clean up her chaos. But I think this was kind of her grieving process, was putting everything together and like all her bills. And every Saturday and Sunday, I would see her pay all her bills and look through her images. And it was almost like the chaos was a way for her to cope through her grieving process, you know? And she never liked any of us to touch us. Like, this is supposed to be the kitchen or the dining table, but we never ate there. Like, we always ate in the, you know? And you see the phone that she would call all her family members, you know? And so in this, you know, there's like the serenity prayer, there's some fake flowers. There's a lot of things that you see with people who are grieving or long-term mourning in that way. Like where it transforms from grieving to just long-term mourning, you know. And so for me, I just, when I thought about this image and thought about it when I really needed to take this picture, because I felt like this was something I always thought about, you know, like we would try to help my grandma, me and my older cousin, and it would just always end up to this again, you know. So, you know, I think about this image and I think a lot about like just the chaos of this, that this was, you know, like I found a lot of great images in here, and we would say like, let's put them up, but it was for her, it was comforting for her to keep it here and keep it like this, you know. And when people come to my house, it's like the opposite of this. You know, I don't hoard. I'm like very clean. I like throw everything away. Like my boyfriend, like it drives him insane, but it's in a way like coping with the chaos of my family, you know, that I don't want to end up here. Or it's also like I don't want to end up like with this grieving process, you know. So this image, you know, and getting to go in here and getting to photograph it, it was really, really important for me. I feel like I would have really regretted it because so much of this house, I felt like talked a lot about long-term, like unhealthy grieving process and mourning process in my family. You know, what happens when you don't actually deal with mourning and grieving? You know, what does that look like, you know? And so, it was really important for me to do that, you know. And I don't know, I could talk a little bit more, or I could also open it up for questions and for either of those images right now.
Who are the people in the pictures?
Different people are in the pictures, are like family members. This person is alive. This person has passed away. this person is alive. Like there's people mostly who have passed away, and some people are alive. So it's a mixture of it's almost all family members, and it's a mixture of people who are alive and passed away.
I'm just curious as to when you talk about the violence and the chaos, are you talking about all this happening in Boyle Heights or somewhere else?
So in part 2, I'm following river patterns and the American dream. So my family migrated from Mexico, and they never stood in a state in Mexico more than a generation or two. They migrated from Mexico City, and they kept going to Chihuahua. And this is like, I was able to follow the migration patterns for years. And then they were in El Paso for like about 4 generations. Then from El Paso, which is very important for so many people, Black and brown people came to Los Angeles in 1945 when the war won, right? So my family settled in Boyle Heights.
In 1945?
Yes. Which is very important, right? Because that a lot of people came up for the railroad. So there's violence in Boyle Heights, but then some of my grandmother's sisters were able to achieve the American dream in in South Almani, when they allowed non-white folks to buy property in South Almani, not main Almani. But then their children still died of gang violence and drug overdose there. So it's still like almost all my grandmother's sisters, almost all of them outlived their children. Yeah. So it's except for like one who just passed away, and he passed away like at 70 something, but almost all of them outlived their children. So it's very sad, you know. So I mean, that's why I've processed all that. And they achieved the American dream either moving to Monterey Park or Whittier or whatever, and they were always close to these river patterns, but there's still something about not.
So the violence was in Boyle Heights?
No, it's east. It's Boyle Heights. It's El Monte. It's not just
But it's in the United States.
Yeah, it's like, I would say it's like in Los Angeles County.
I was looking at the light. Is that a window that's...
Yeah. And for some of these, especially, there's other images in my grandmother's house. My grandmother was very paranoid. So my grandmother lived in this really beautiful apartment, very, very beautiful. It was like made in 1910. It was like Art Deco. And I never really thought about it growing up. But it was a fourplex. And because I live in a nice Art Deco one that's like built around the same time, like a fourplex. But she was really paranoid about the neighbors gossiping. So she would always put like aluminum and heavy curtains. So we never were allowed to open the windows. And we didn't have like AC or anything. And so like ever, I think I would open when I got older, because I was like the brave cousin. I would open the window yeah. But so when I was making some of these images, I ripped down the aluminum to be able to bring in the light. And it was really beautiful. And you could see all of Los Angeles from her house, but we never could see that. Yeah, because of the paranoia of neighbors gossiping. But I just think also we have a lot of undiagnosed mental illness in my family. Yeah. So it's very sad in that.
So, a little lighter question.
Oh, it's totally fine.
But no, so do all of your series tend to have like a very specific story arc, or do you start kind of with something and then make the story as you go?
No, so I start thinking about a question, or I think about a theme, like thematically, and then it kind of like builds. And so I think about like water and family migrations, and then it kind of like, I know I give myself enough time. So it's kind of like open-ended, and then so in that way,
Nice.
Yeah.
How did you get started in photography?
I started at 16. A friend of mine was already doing community college classes, and went to a party. I was like dropped out of high school, and I seen her photography. It was really beautiful, black and white, and I told her I wanted to do that, and she encouraged me. We're still best friends today, and so I went back to school, to community college, and I was able to do like high school, like home studies and community college classes. And that, honestly, I always tell like my students, like that saved my life, because I was just like really bored with school. And so being able to do photography, and like I was able to graduate on time, and then I just started to do community college through that. So it was a friend that just was, I was already interested in photography. I would always take throwaway cameras everywhere. But I didn't know the term photography. I just knew I liked to take pictures. Like, I just knew that was like something. Like, I don't like being in pictures, even though a lot of my pictures now are me. But that's because it's like a stand-in for my family who's no longer here, you know? But I just always was really interested in taking pictures. But yeah, then I learned the term photography.
So I kind of view it as a still life, and struck by the repetition of the flowers there. Did you manipulate it in any way, or was that as it was?
No, I try not to manipulate like any type of, like, if I see a scene, I try not my best to manipulate it. I'm very like, I was trained in documentary style. So even though like a lot of documentary, like there is a little bit of manipulation, like you'll be like, oh, move. I really try to be very straight photography in that. So yeah, I mean, this is exactly how my grandmother had it in that way. So yeah, I don't think I like touched anything in that way. Like I saw, like usually for me, it's like something will catch my eye. So I'll be like, oh, like the lighting's right. So let's do it at that moment. Uh-huh. Yeah.
So what inspires you when you're taking a shoot? You know, you're photographing something. What, in your mind says, okay, this is the shot?
Sometimes I don't even know if it's the shot. Like it comes like vice versa. Sometimes I have an idea. Like sometimes like on a day I'll be like, okay, like we're gonna go somewhere, and I have an idea that I want to take pictures of this place, or I need to. Like I'm missing this idea from my project. Like going to my grandmother's house. She was living with us at the time, and I need to get her medicine. And so I was like, cool, I can actually take pictures of the house without her getting all paranoid. So I didn't know what I was gonna photograph there. We took like 3 hours and we photographed a bunch of stuff. And I didn't know that would be the last time I ever was in my grandmother's house. And so yeah, I just, it was like 3:30 to like maybe like 3 to 5. Like in winter, which means then the sun was like almost dark after when we finished. So we just, took a bunch of rolls, I did a self-portrait in there that's in the same series, and so there's so much different stuff. So some stuff I haven't shown that maybe I'll show one day. Stuff like, you know what I mean? So like sometimes I'm like, oh, let's just go somewhere. Or sometimes I'm like, okay, let's go there, and like, oh, we have like an hour till the time I want to shoot, or I'm like, oh, let's just shoot. And then I'm like, okay, let's shoot at this time. And then I end up liking the time where it's like not even the right light, but I like what I did. So it's like, honestly, I just go, like, I just do it, because I'm like, if I get in my head that I'm like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing, or, oh, it's not the right, then it's like, I'm just like kind of psyching myself out. Whereas I'm just like, if I'm just like open and I know that I want to put some stuff into it, or I need to create something, then I'm like, usually that's when like some good stuff happens. Mm-hmm.
I feel the afternoon sun there. They're coming in that window. That was the first thing that I thought about, was the time of day.
Mm-hmm.
And so that window usually was covered with foil.
Yeah, most of them were covered with like foils, like, oh yeah. So it was, yeah, that I mean, it's just like, I don't know, when you learn to live with stuff like that, it's just, it's very normal. So it's like, yeah, just taking all of that down and then kind of seeing what happens. Mm-hmm. Is there any other question? right, thank you.
Any other questions, anyone? Oh yeah, way back here, Mary.
Is that I'm gonna call it an old-fashioned camera that you use, you know, with the roll where you go to the store and have it printed, or do you use a digital camera?
Oh no, that's totally fine. It's a medium format camera, so it's heavy. It's like about 6 or 7 pounds, which is pretty heavy for a camera. So yeah, it's old fashioned. It's now, I would say, let's see, it's about 50 years old, I think. So yeah, I love it though. It's not like a 4x5, which is a really heavy camera. So I use it, I love it. It's what I mostly shoot all my work in. And so I really like that camera. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you bring your camera every day with you?
No, it's I sometimes I do. I have a smaller camera. I have like this smaller instant camera that sometimes I'll take a lot with me.
Do you sometimes use your phone to take?
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, totally. Yeah. But sometimes like people are surprised that I don't take, like, I don't know, when people are taking like a lot of pictures, sometimes like I don't take pictures. Because like I like to live in the moment, which sounds really goofy, but like I don't know, like, you know, like if I'm like at concerts or certain things, like I don't really like taking out my phone, because it's like a lot of times that's my work brain, and so like a lot of times it's like, oh, I don't take out my camera, my phone. But like, you know, like my nephew, who I always take a lot of I take a lot of pictures of, like I have like so many pictures of him, and you know, like my family, like I take a lot of pictures of and stuff like that. But there's a lot of times I just like kind of live in the moment, and so like I won't use my phone, you know, like it's kind of, there's a privateness to my life, you know, and so like I'm just sort of private about certain things that people are surprised about. They're like, oh, I would think you would take your phone out or take a picture. I'm like, oh no, I just kind of want to be private. Like, I don't know, I went to Hawaii recently, and I didn't really take pictures because I was just like, I want to, it's like kind of private, you know? Like, so there's a privateness I've learned, like being so open about my life, then you get really private about certain things. So people are shocked about that, you know? Yeah.
How does your family react to like being in the subject and then your work being shown in something like a museum?
So my nephew has been shown in museums since he was a toddler. Like, no, actually since he was like 6 months old or 7 months old, and now he's 12 and a half. He's about 13. So it's like so normal. It's like normalized for him, and there's like a joke that when it's my work and it's not him, he's like, oh, whatever. You know, like he's just like, he's like so like nonchalant about it. But now I think he's more shy about it. Like there's times where he's like, I don't want my picture taken. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. You know, and I'm really close to him. Like I've helped raise him because my brother was 17 and a half when he had him. And then my mom passed away really young. So I've had to really step into that role of helping raise him. So in that way, like it's interesting seeing a child grow up in that, you know, and I didn't grow up going to museums or really knowing art, you know. So for him, it's normal to be in the museums and to get his picture taken. But then like, he's also like, there's periods where he's like, I don't want to be photographed. And then he's like, it's so normal for him. Like one of his pictures got acquired by a museum in Texas. And he's like, oh, whatever. And then he's like, can I take my grandkids one day? And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, your grandkids could take their grandkids. I'm like, and he's like, oh, okay. Like, you know, like, so for him, that's like, well, my brother and me have like kind of like a weird relationship where like we just really, I don't know, it's like a cosmic, I feel like we kind of understand each other in a way, like that's like non-commutative, you know, where he knows that I have to do this, and it's not even about like famousness, or it's not about recognition, because I'm actually a very shy person. It's that I want the work to be seen, because it's like what I said in the earlier thing, it's about systematic erasure. And so like this work being seen and being talked about also just opens the door for other people to say, like, your story matters, and like, don't allow the system to erase you, because like, this is what happened with my family. And you know, it's wrong. It's wrong when they try to erase you, because they're saying like your existence doesn't matter, or like this idea of lesser than, you know. And so for my brother, he understands that, you know. And so when our mother passed away, you know, and I remember the doctor was saying like, is she a drug addict? And I'm like, what? I'm like, what do you mean? And she was like on her deathbed, and it's because she had hepatitis C and cirrhosis, but she hadn't drank in like, I don't know, 22 years. But it's because we were born with bad genes. It's like, are you sure she wasn't drinking undercover? I'm like, my mom was really proud of her sobriety, but the doctor was just looking at her like trash, like she should just be thrown in the garbage. And I never forgot that look, you know. And I'm like, this is the doctor that's supposed to be saving her life on her deathbed, and she's just looking at her like garbage. And I'm like, but my mom has like little old school gangster tattoos and stuff like that, and I'm like, this is wrong. What's happening is wrong. And you know, so like talking about it, you know, I could just be bitter about it, or I can actually talk about it, acknowledge it in that way. And that's, I guess, how me and my brother understand that, you know, in that way. And just about the whole existence of our family, you know. So in that way, I'm a really shy person. I would like to just be normal, but in that way, like, so much has happened that it's like, no, you know. Yeah. So, you know, it's kind of like that understanding. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'm curious as to where you live now and where your brother and your nephew live.
So my family lives in Boyle Heights.
They still in Boyle Heights?
Yeah. So, and I lived with my family in Boyle Heights until I lived with my boyfriend. So my family still lives in Boyle Heights. I lived with them until like 4 years ago, and then I moved in with my boyfriend in Mid-City. So yeah, and I don't know, I would live in Boyle Heights again, because it's like, it's not the place, it's the system, you know. It's not the place. It's like underfunding of community resources. It's like everything. It's all the stuff that goes into it, you know. So
the reason I was asking, I know they were gentrifying that area.
Well, like there's
there's
a big resistance, but I think like Boyle Heights has like history, not even just recently. You can go back to the 40s, and there's been a history of activism in Boyle Heights. So I think people forget that it's not even just this recent activism that we've constantly resisted. So it's like it's in the roots to resist, you know, the opposition. So yeah. So yeah, my family still lives there. Mm-hmm.
Any other comments, questions? I have a question. Yeah, go ahead, Stephanie.
So I'm assuming you have a dark room, right?
No,
No dark room?
no, because it's color. Yeah, no.
Oh, okay. So how do you process it?
I mean, you can process it with, you can just get the film processed at a lab, and then I scan it, and then I digitally, you can digitally process it, which I learned like in undergraduate, like how to digitally process it. Oh, okay. So, yeah.
So you were saying that you had students. So you teach?
Mm-hmm.
You run a program?
No, whenever I teach like undergraduate classes.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you teach where? You teach at Cal State LA or?
No, I've taught at Rio Hondo. I've taught at Whittier College. I've taught at a school, Prescott College in Arizona. So I've taught at different colleges, yeah. Mm-hmm. And then I've taught like as a teaching artist with high school students. So, yeah. Yeah, I love teaching. Like I love it. That's like my number one thing. Mm-hmm.
When you first started the talk, you talked about how your subject has seen things that only his eyes have seen. And I think it was Roland Barthes talked about that anyway, how, you know, capturing that image is the history of not only this person, but everything they have seen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's just so beautiful, because when I see your images of people, that your family, your friends, or just your neighborhood, I see in them that you're in them reflecting their world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're so powerful and amazing. And I love that you talked about that in the very beginning. Do you feel that happens, or is there anything you do to kind of make more of these things happen?
No,
Or just kind of
I just have them meditate before, like a very,
really?
very quick meditation, just so that they feel comfortable. That's it,
Yeah, I think they're fabulous. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Star. We're so
Thank you.
happy to have you here.